attachments and go ahead and create a new folder in square brackets attachment ID like that, and inside create a new file route.ts like this. Great. And inside let's export asynchronous function delete, which is going to have a request, which is a type of request, and it's going to have params, which of course is an object which has our course ID in a string, but it also has the attachment ID, which is also a type of string like that. Perfect. So let's go ahead and let's open a try and catch block. Let's console log attachment ID. So we know this is where the error is coming from. Let's log the error and let's return new next response from next/server internal error with a status of 500, so like we do usually. Now let's extract our user ID from the out using clerk next.js, and while we are here, let's immediately import the database from @libdb like that. And let's immediately check if there is no user ID. In that case, return new next response unauthorized like that with a status of 401. Beautiful. And now below that, while we have to do the same thing as we did with creating an attachment, and that is to check if we are the owner of this course, if we created it, right? We don't want someone to abuse our API. So const course owner is going to be await db.course.find unique, where ID is params.course ID and user ID is equal to user ID like that. If there is no course owner, in that case, we can just return new next response unauthorized with a status of 500, 401, like that. Great. And now let's finally write const attachment is equal to await db.attachment.delete, where course ID is equal to params course ID, and the ID of the attachment we want to delete is params.attachment ID. And then we can just go ahead and write return new next response.json attachment, which we deleted. Great. So let's just double check that the attachment ID, which we are accessing in the params and defining right here, is not misspelled inside of this folder. And let's also go back inside of the attachment form. And let's confirm that our onDelete function is properly targeting the attachments. So let's go /API/courses, the individual course ID /attachments/ID. I think this should work just fine. So let's go ahead and try this. So if I click X right here, it's loading, and attachment has been deleted, and this says no attachments yet. Great job. So you completely finished the course attachments form. What we have to do now is finally get onto creating our chapters. Great job. So let's go ahead and let's create this little form for creating our chapters. In order to do that, the first thing I want to do is finish our Prisma schema. So we started something in the Prisma schema right here, where we are able to have categories, attachments, and a course, right? But now we need to create a model for our chapters. And while we are here, I just want to add everything that we're going to need for the rest of this tutorial. So let's go ahead and let's start with the model chapter here. So model chapter is going to have an ID, which is a type of string, @ID, and @default UUID like this. Then we're going to have a title, which is a string as well, a description, which is an optional string, and db.text like that. Video URL, which is an optional string, and db.text as well. We're going to have a position, which is an integer like that, is published, which is going to be a Boolean, and it's going to have a default value of false like that. And we're also going to have an option is free, which is also a Boolean with a default value of false like that. Then we're going to have mux data, which is just going to be a relation to the model mux data, right? So we're going to use this to process the video, but don't worry about this error now. We're going to create this model in a second. So now let's create a back relation with the course. So each chapter is going to have its course. So course ID is a type of string like that, and a relation course at relation fields like this, course ID, references ID, and on delete, we're going to have cascade like this, all in one line. Great. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and let's also create a relation with the user progress, right? So users are going to have specific progress on each chapter. So let's write user progress to be user progress like that. And it's going to be an array, right? So ignore these errors for now. And let's just not misspell the progress here. Progress like that. And let's add the created at, which is a date, time, and the default value of now, and updated at, which is also a date, time, with a decorator updated at like this. Great. Now let's go ahead and let's create this max data model, which is throwing an error here. So I'm going to write model max data. It's going to have an ID, which is a type of string, at ID, and the default value of UUID like that. Chapter ID is going to be a string and it's going to be unique like this. It's going to have an asset ID, which is a string, and it's going to have a playback ID, which is also an optional string. All right, and now let's create a proper relation with the chapter. So I'm just going to move it here, and then I'm going to write chapter at relation fields, chapter ID, references, the ID, and on delete, cascade like this. And now, as you can see, we no longer have an error with the max data in our newly created model chapter. Great. And now let's go ahead and let's create our user progress model, which is throwing an error right here. So let's go here and let's write model user progress like that. It's going to have an ID with the default value of UUID like that. It's going to have a user ID, so it's going to be limited to one user, and chapter ID, which is a string, and the back relation to the chapter. So chapter at relation, so at relation fields, chapter ID, references ID, and we're going to have on delete cascade like that. Great. And while we are here, let's also add some other options here, like is completed, which is a boolean, and the default value of false like that. And now let's add created at, which is a date, time, at default now, and updated at, which is also a date, time, with a decorator updated at like this. And now let's just fix this warning real quick by adding an index to the chapter ID like that. And let's ensure that there needs to be a unique combination of a user and a chapter ID. So let's just write at unique like this, user ID, chapter ID like that. Perfect. And now let's see and we'll see if we have any errors here. Right, so we just resolved the user progress error and we resolved the max data error. But now we have an error because we are creating a relation with the course for the chapter, but inside of our course model, the chapter is nowhere to be found. So let's go ahead and below this category, let's write chapters, so multiple chapter, which we just created, and make sure to put an array at the end like that, so we can actually keep chapters and attachments together like this. And now in here we no longer have an error for this line course, but we have to create an index to fix this warning. So let's go ahead and add index course ID like this. Great. And while we are here, we resolved all the errors here, but I just want to add two more models which we're going to use to purchase our courses, right? So we resolved all of those, and now let's go all the way to the bottom and let's add a model purchase, which is going to have an ID, which is a type of string, default value of UUID like that, user ID, which is also a string, course ID, which is a string, and a back relation to the course using the course ID, referencing to the ID, and you guessed it, on delete cascade like that. Great. And while we're here, let's also add a created at field, which is a date time and the default value of now, and updated at, which is also a date time with the decorator updated at like this. And let's go ahead and add an index here because we already know we're gonna need it, course ID like that. And now we have to create a back relation to the course. So the same way we added the chapters, we now have to go back to the course model and below attachments add purchases like this, purchase, and like this. There we go. So just make sure this is purchases, all right? All right, and now let's just write our last model, which is going to be a Stripe customer. So model Stripe customer like this is going to have an ID, which is a string, default UUID like that. It's going to have a user ID, which is a string and unique. So only one Stripe customer per logged in user. And we're also going to store the Stripe customer ID to be a string and unique like that. And let's add created at to be a date time at default now, and let's add updated at to be a date time with the decorator updated at like that. There we go. So we finished our entire Prisma schema here, and now what we have to do is go inside of our terminal here. I'm gonna shut down my Prisma Studio from here. I'm going to shut down my application and I'm going to write npx prisma generate. So we add all of those new models inside of our DB util, and now npx prisma db push like this. And there's a chance that we might have to drop our database because we just added a lot of stuff and we have some existing items. And it might be that we don't have to do that at all. Great. So we finished that, and now we can safely npm run dev our application again. And now we are finally ready to create this chapters model, this chapters form right here. So now that we have our Prisma schema completed, we are ready to create this little to-do which we've written right here. So let's head back inside of our page.tsx, which holds all of these sections right here. So inside of the dashboard, routes, teacher, courses, course ID, page.tsx right here. Let's go ahead and find this to-do chapters. And what I want to do is I want to copy the description form like this. I'm going to copy the description form and I'm going to replace this div with chapters like this. So just paste it here. And now you see that we're going to have the course description under course chapters after you save this file. So let's go ahead and let's go inside of underscore components here and let's copy the description form and paste it inside. And let's rename it to chapters-form like this. And let's quickly do the thing we always do by renaming description form. So 1, 2, 3 instances to chapters form like that. And then let's go back inside of page.tsx, find this description form, which is in the course chapters section, and rename it to chapters form from /_components chapters-form like this. So make sure you have this import. Great. So now that we have that, one more thing that we have to do is we have to go back inside of our course model. So here where we fetch the unique course, we are including the attachments. So what we're going to have to do now is also include the chapters like this. So let's include the chapters and let's order by position, right? So we want to order them in the position which the user has defined. And while we're here, I'm also noticing that we're fetching this only by ID, but it would be good to also use the user ID. So let's go ahead and add user ID as well. So only the creator of the course can fetch this course. Even though our API is protected, let's not even use this at all. So it redirects if user is not the owner of this course. And while we are here, we can actually update our required fields, because if you look now, it says 5 out of 5 because I have a title, I have a description, image, and course category, and I have the price, right? But we're also gonna have to create a required field that we have at least one chapter which is also published. So let's go ahead and let's add course chapters.sum, get the individual chapter, and extract chapter.isPublished like this. So we are looking at least one chapter that is published. And now if you save, you can see that I have 5 out of 6 completed fields. So I still should not be able to publish this course. Great. So now we can finally go inside of our newly created chapters form. So make sure you are inside of the chapters form right here. And let's go ahead and let's change our form schema to just have a simple title like this, z.string and a minimum value of 1, right? So our form schema inside of this form will just be used to create a chapter using a title. But then we're gonna have to add a video and a description to the chapter in a separate view, which will enable us to publish that chapter. Until those fields are not filled, we're not gonna allow the user to publish the chapter, same like we are doing in the course setup. So we're gonna have some required fields. All right. And now what I wanna do is I wanna replace this use states right here. So let's go ahead and let's add const is creating, set is creating, use state false like this, and let's replace this to not be is editing and set is editing. Let's use is updating and set is updating. So the reason I switched to is creating and set is creating is because I just want to be correct with our naming. So in this form, we're only going to be able to create a new chapter, or we're going to be able to reorder the chapters, right? So there is no editing of the chapters. The editing will be done in a separate view, which we are going to create. So now let's change this from toggle edit to toggle creating like that. And let's just change this. Let me just open this in a separate arrow function like this so you can see it clearly. So let's just change this to use set is creating and just do the reverse of the current value like that. And now let's go ahead inside of this form right here and let's change the default values to always be a title and an empty string, right? So no need for initial values in the form here because, as I said, it's only going to be used to create a new one. All right. And now let's go inside of this onSubmit function here. So we're going to modify this a bit. Instead of axios.patch, what it's going to do is axios.post/API/courses course ID. But similar to what we did with attachments, this is going to be /chapters like this. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to say chapter created like that. And we're going to toggle creating like this. Great. And now let's go ahead and let's start working with this right here. So this button is gonna toggle creating like that. This is not gonna say course description. Instead, it's gonna say course chapters. And instead of using is editing, we're gonna work with is creating like that. Instead of pencil, it's going to be plus circle from Lucid React. So make sure you import plus circle and you can remove the pencil. Actually, leave it here. Perhaps we're going to use it. And instead of edit description, it's going to be add a chapter like this. And now let's change the remaining instances of is editing to is creating like that. So right here and right here. And this form field is going to be a title, right? So just so we get rid of that error right here. So there we go. Now we have course chapters. This is a description is still here. We're going to modify that. And we have add a chapter here, which is working by triggering the text area. All right. So now let's go ahead and let's modify this a little bit. So inside of this form right here, we are not going to use a text area. Instead, we're going to be using the input from add/components UI input like this, and you can remove the text area. So we're just going to be working with the input, and let's go ahead and change this to say example introduction to the course, like so something that the user should name their chapter. Great. So inside of here we can actually remove this div wrapping a button. No need. It's only one element inside. Like that, and instead of save, we're gonna say create, right? So we indicate that this is only for creating like that. Perfect. And now let's go ahead below this, a conditional which renders the form. And let's go ahead and add, if we are not creating like that, let's go ahead and let's add a div, which is just going to say no chapters like that for now, because there's nothing else to do here. Otherwise, sorry, also another one is creating. So a separate here below, which is just gonna say a paragraph, drag and drop to reorder the chapters like that. And the class name is gonna be text.extra small, text-muted-foreground, and empty-4 like this. Great. And now what I wanna actually do is I wanna find this, right? So where we have the initial data dot description and no description, you can remove this entirely like this, right? So no need for that. So the only thing I wanted to write is no chapters like this. Great. And now let's just style this a bit so it makes more sense when a user sees it. So let's go inside of here, and I'm going to go ahead and give this a class name to be dynamic CN. So make sure you have a CN. We should already have it imported, and we do. And let's give it a default value of text-small and margin top 2 like that. And then if there is no initial data.chapters.length, so if it is empty, in that case text-slate-500 and italic like that. And don't forget to put a comma here. And now we have an error because we're trying to access the chapters inside of the initial data, which we defined in the props to just be a course. So let's extend it the same way we did with the attachments to use chapters, which is a chapter from Prisma client like that. So make sure you import the chapter right here, the same way we did with course from Prisma client. All right, so now this error should not exist here. Great. And now let's go inside and let's just write if there is no initial data.chapters.length. In that case, we're gonna write no chapters like this. And I'm just gonna write a comment here to add a list of chapters like that. So now let's take a look at what this looks like. There we go. So now it says no chapters like that. Perfect. And let's go ahead and click on add chapter, and there we go. You can see that now we are just able to quickly create a new chapter using this input. And let's go ahead and try that immediately. So I'm going to write test, and I expect an error because we have not created an API route which is able to submit this chapters right here. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go inside of our API folder. So right here inside of courses, course ID, and create a new folder, not new file, but a new folder called chapters like that. And inside create a new file route.ts like this. And let's export asynchronous function post, which is gonna have a request, which is a type of request like that. And it's also gonna have params like this, which is an object which has a course ID, which is a string like that. Let's open a try and catch block. Let's get the error, and let's console log chapters with an error like that. And let's return new next response from next/server internal error with a status of 500 like this. Great. Now let's go inside and let's extract our user ID from the auth, and we get that from clerknext.js. Now let's go ahead and let's extract the title using await request.json. If there is no user ID, in that case return new next response unauthorized with a status of 401 like that. Now let's check if we are the owner of this course. So course owner is await db. So import db from @lib/db right here. I'm gonna separate it from this imports. All right, await db.course.find unique where ID is params.course ID, and user ID is user ID, like that. If there is no course owner constant, that means we are not the owner, so return new next response unauthorized with a status of 401, like that. Perfect. So before we can create a new chapter, we have to attempt to fetch a new chapter, to fetch the last chapter, so we know what is the position we have to add for this newly created chapter. So const last chapter is going to be await db.chapter.find unique, find first, where course ID is params.course ID. So we're attempting to find the last chapter which was created inside of this course, and we're gonna order by position, but this time descending, like this. Great. And now we're gonna write const new position last chapter, in that case last chapter dot position +1. Otherwise, we're gonna start with the position of 1. And now we can finally create our chapter. So const chapter await db.chapter.create, like this. Data, we're gonna pass in the title of this chapter, the course ID, which is params.course ID, and a position, which is new position, like that. There we go. And now we can do return next response.json chapter, like this. And I'm just gonna go ahead and prepare my Prisma Studio. So I'm gonna write npx Prisma Studio, and that's gonna open on localhost 555. So let's go ahead and just refresh this. And let me show you that right now we have all of these new models here, but what I'm interested in is a chapter. So I'm going to select a chapter here, and I'm going to close everything else. So I'm just focusing on the chapter here. And now let's go ahead and let's try and create a new chapter. So I'm going to write test. Let's click create. And there we go. It looks like it's working, and we no longer have a text that there are no chapters, which should mean that if I refresh this Prisma Studio where my chapters are, there we go. I have a chapter with a title, with no description, no video URL, and a position of 1. And is published, as you can see, is false. Great. And is free is false. Max data doesn't exist, and we have a relation to the course. Perfect. There are no user progress on it, so no one marked this chapter as complete or anything like that. There we go. So that is exactly what we need. What we have to do next is we have to create a list inside of this course chapters, which we are going to use to drag and drop to reorder them. And then we're going to start creating the individual screen, which is going to look very similar to this for editing and publishing a chapter. So now let's go ahead and let's create a list to reorder our chapters and to display them. So I'm going to go back inside of my chapters form right here, and I'm going to find this to do, which we've written right here, add a list of chapters right below the no chapters text. So let's remove this and let's write chapters list like this, which is going to be a self-closing tag. We're going to have it an option on edit, which is going to be an empty arrow function. We're going to give it an option on reorder, which is also going to be an empty arrow function. And we're also going to have items, which are either going to be initial data.chapters or an empty array like this. And if you save, we're going to get an error because chapters list does not exist. So let's go ahead and let's find the chapters list. So let's create one inside of the underscore components, chapters-list.tsx. Let's mark this as use client like that. And let's export const chapters list like this. And let's return a div chapters list. So it doesn't matter, we're gonna change this. All I wanna do is go back inside of the chapters form and import this from /chapters list because we are in the same folder, so we can do that. And if you see, we have now an error here because we have not added an interface inside of the chapters list. So let's do that now. Let's write an interface chapter list props, chapters list props like that. It's going to have items, which is going to be a chapter from Prisma client, and make sure you add a little array at the end because there's going to be multiple of them. on a reorder, it's going to have update data, which is going to be an ID, which is a string, and a position, which is a number, and that's going to be an array. And then just use a void at the end. And on edit, which is going to be a very simple function which accepts the ID, which is a type of string, and returns a void as well. And now let's go ahead and let's assign those props to chapters list props like that, and let's extract them. So items on reorder and on edit like that. And now inside of our chapters list, we no longer have these errors. Sorry, inside of the chapters form component where we render the chapters list, there are no more TypeScript errors. Perfect. So what I want to do now is I want to install a package called React Beautiful Drag and Drop. But one thing with that package is that it's been discontinued, meaning it's no longer maintained by its original creators. So there is a fork called Hello Pangea DND. So let's go ahead and install that. So I'm going to write npm install at hello-pangea or Pangea, I don't know how to pronounce it, /dnd like this. So this is the same package called React Beautiful Drag and Drop, but the original is no longer maintained. So these people created a fork and they are actively maintaining it. Great. So let's do npm run dev. Let's refresh our local host and let's go back inside of the chapters list right here. So what I want to do is I want to prepare a couple of states and a couple of functions here. So const is mounted, set is mounted to use state false. Const chapters, set chapters is going to be use state, which accepts the items as the default value. And now let's do a little mounting trick here. So we're going to write use effect from React like this. So make sure you've imported use effect from React. And let's just add an empty dependency array, and set is mounted to true. So what is this doing? Well, when you have the use client directive, that doesn't mean that the server-side rendering is completely skipped, right? So this is definitely a client component, but use client is still run once on the server-side rendering and then again executed on the client. And that can cause hydration errors if what was rendered on server side and then what was rendered on client side doesn't match. So what we have to do is a little trick here that we don't display anything if we're not mounted. So I'm going to display return null here, which means that in server-side rendering, this entire component is not even going to be displayed, and only when it comes to client-side rendering, this one is going to be displayed, and that's going to fix our hydration issues. But why do we even get hydration issues? Well, it's going to be because of that drag and drop component, which is not very optimized for the server components and server-side rendering, right? So that's why we have those hydration errors similar to models. We often have those in models as well. Great. And now one more use effect that I want to add above is use effect, which is going to rehydrate our items, right? So I'm going to go ahead and write items inside, and all I'm going to do is set chapters to be those new items like this. So just make sure you have use effect, use state, and chapter and in your imports. And now let's go ahead and let's actually import everything we need from the Hello Pangea DND. So let's go ahead and import from at Hello Pangea DND. Let's import drag drop context. Let's import droppable. Let's import draggable. And let's import drop result, which is a type. All right, and while we are here, let's also import cn from add/lib/cn. Is it? Utils, my apologies. And let's also install one chatcn component called badge. So let's write npx chatcn-ui at latest add badge like this, and just confirm the installation of this component, and then you can npm run dev your project again and just refresh your local host. Great, so we have all the imports we need, and now we are ready to start drag and dropping. So let's go ahead and let's remove this div, and let's add drag drop context like that. let's add on drag end for now to just be an empty arrow function. Let's add a droppable like this. Let's give it an ID. So droppable ID is going to be chapters like that. Inside, let's go ahead and let's open this function like that, which is immediately going to return a div in which we're going to spread provider. Sorry, it's not going to be provider. This is provided. So provided dot droppable props like that. And the ref is going to be provided dot inner ref like this. And inside, we're going to map over our chapters. So chapters.map, let's get the individual chapter and the index like that. And let's go ahead and let's add draggable like this. Let's give it a key of chapter.id. Draggable ID is going to be chapter.id and index is going to be index. So I'm just going to collapse these elements like this. All right. So we have our draggable now, and inside of the draggable, let's go ahead and again open a function which says provided like that. And what it does, it returns another div, which is going to have a class name, which is going to be a CN library, which we have imported. The default values are going to be flex, items-center, gap-x-2, bg-slate-200, border-slate-200, border, text-slate-700 like that, rounded-md, margin bottom of 4, and text-small like that. And then we're gonna have chapter.isPublished. In that case, it's gonna be bg-sky 100, border-sky 200, and text-sky 700 like that. All right, and let's go ahead and pass in the ref, which is going to be provided.innerRef, and we're also going to drag provided.draggable props like this. So in here we spread the droppable props, and inside of this we drag the draggable props. All right, inside of that div, let's go ahead and create a little handle where we're gonna be able to move our cursor on and then drag and drop by that handle. So open a div, which is gonna have a class name, which you guessed it, is gonna be dynamic. So default values are px-2, py-3, border-r, border-r-slate-200. On hover, the background is going to change to BG Slate 300, rounded-L-MD, and transition like that. And then if chapter is published, in that case, it's going to be border-R-sky-200 like that. And hover is going to be BG-sky-200 like that. And let's go ahead and let's spread provided.drag handle props. So this is going to be our drag handle, and inside add an icon bi grid vertical. Sorry, let's add a grid from Lucid React, and then I'm gonna see if we have any other options. So grid from Lucid React, let's just move that to the top right here, and let's see if this is already visible here. There we go, it is. You can see how I have a little space for my icon here, sorry, for my chapter here. So instead of grid, I actually want to use grip. So I'm just going to scroll so we can see here, and it's going to be grip like this. So change this to grip and import grip from Lucid React. There we go. So you can see now how when I hover, I'm able to drag and drop this, right? All right. And now let's continue developing this, but let's just go ahead and give this a class name. So class name is gonna be h-5 and w-5 like that, so it's a bit smaller. And let's go now outside of this div and let's render chapter.title like this. There we go. So this is our chapter called test like that, and then below that add a new div, and let's go ahead and let's give it a class name of ml-auto pr-2 flex items-center and gap-x-2 like that. and inside, if chapter is free, in that case, we're gonna render a badge element, which we just added. So add/components UI badge like that, and just write free like this. So make sure you have the badge imported from the components here. All right, and then let's go ahead and let's go below outside of this conditional here and add another badge. And inside we're gonna write if chapter.isPublished, it's going to say published, otherwise it's gonna say draft like that. And let's give this badge a class name. So class name is gonna be cn bg-slate-500, but if chapter is published, in that case it's gonna be bg-sky-700 like this. There we go. So let's take a look at how this looks. Beautiful. So you can see how now I have a handle here, I have the title of this chapter, and it's written that it is a draft. What's missing is a little pencil icon here that is going to be able to open the onEdit function. So let's go ahead outside of this badge and let's go ahead and just write a pencil icon from Lucid React like this. Let's go ahead and let's give it, so I'm just going to scroll so we can see, there we go. You can see a big pencil button here now. And let's just write on click to call onEdit chapter.id like that. And let's give it a class name of w-4h-4 cursor-pointer hover opacity-75 and transition like this. There we go. So now it's a small little pencil right here. Perfect. And one more thing that we have to do is just go outside of this draggable right here and let's just render provided.placeholder like this. There we go. So that is our entire UI for the drag and drop thing. What we have to do now is we actually have to enable this functionality to drag and drop. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to refresh this and I'm going to add a couple of chapters. So this is going to be an outro. Let's create that, and there we go. Now we have an outro. Let's add test. All right, so at least 3 of them like that, so we can have some fun. So if you try now, you can see that it appears like we can do something, but it actually isn't doing anything. You can see the moment I finish, they go back to their initial positions, right? So let's just refresh so they are all right here. All right, and let's go and let's actually create this on drag end function. So that's actually going to be a function on drag end like that. So let's go ahead inside of this, above this return null, write a new function called const on drag end. And it's going to have a result in its props, which is a type of drop result, which we have imported. So just make sure you have drop result imported from DND right here. And let's go ahead and write if there is no result.destination, we can just break the function. Otherwise, let's go ahead and create an array from our chapters. So const items is an array from chapters like this. Const open an array reordered item to be items.splice result.source.index and 1, and then items.splice result.destination.index 0 and reordered item like that. Great. And now let's go ahead and let's figure out which chapters were affected by this change, so we know which one to send to the API to update their actual position in the database. So let's write const start index to be math.min result.source.index and result.destination.index. So like this, and course end index to be math.max result.source.index and result.destination.index like this. And then const updated chapters. So just make sure this is all in one line, all right? And then const updated chapters is going to be items.slice like that. And let's go ahead and write start index and end index +1 like this. And then set chapters to be items like this. And then let's go ahead and let's write const bulk update data is going to be updated chapters.map, get the individual chapter, and immediately return an object with ID of chapter.id and position of items.find index, get the individual item, and search by the ID. So item.id is identical to chapter.id, like that. And on reorder, bulk update data, like that. There we go. So this should be working now. Let's see if we can have it staying. There we go. So you can see how now when I reorder, they stay here locally, right? So I'm gonna add a new one like this. There we go. And if I drag it to the top, you can see that it stays here, right? If I move test above it, it's staying, right? But when we refresh, it's all back to its initial position. So that's what we have to change now. So let's go ahead and let's go back inside of our chapters form function right here. So you can see that we did not pass anything in the on reorder nor in the on edit. So let's create this on reorder function. So I'm gonna go just outside here, so just below the on submit function. Let's write const on reorder. It's going to be an asynchronous function which takes in the update data, which is going to be an array of objects like this, and it's going to have an ID, which is a string, and a position, which is a number, right? Like that. So just make sure to write this, all right? And now inside, we're gonna have a try and catch block. So let's toast.error, something went wrong here. Let's add it finally, which is going to call set is updating to be false, like that. And inside set is updating to be true inside of the try block. And then await axios.put /API/courses/individual course ID/chapters/reorder. So we're going to have a separate route just for reordering. Like I don't want to mix and match that with our update route. And let's go ahead inside and let's pass in a list, which is going to be the update data like that. There we go. And then a toast.success saying chapters reordered. Okay, reordered like that, and router.refresh like this. There we go. And now we can use this on reorder and pass it inside of this chapters list right here on reorder. So what I expect to happen is it to get a 404 error once I attempt to reorder. So I'm going to drag this last one to the top and I should get an error. There we go. Something went wrong. So I got an error. That's exactly what I expected to happen. Perfect. So what we have to do now is create that API route. So let's go inside of our API folder. Let's go here. So API, and we have the chapters. So API courses, course ID, and we have the chapters here. And inside, create a new folder called reorder, like that, and create a route.ts inside of it. And now inside, let's go ahead and let's write export asynchronous function put, which is going to have a request, and it's going to have params, which are going to hold the course ID, which is a string like that. All right, so we have that now. Let's go ahead and open a try and catch block. Let's console log the error. So I'm gonna call this reorder and an error, so I know what's happening in the terminal, and then return new next response from next/server internal error, like that, with a status of 500. There we go. Now let's go ahead and let's extract the user ID from auth function, which we get from clerk next.js. While we are here, let's add database, import database from @/lib/db. Let's go ahead now and let's write if there is no user ID, we can return new next response, unauthorized, with a status of 401, like that. Now let's go ahead and let's get the list from our request.json. So wait request.json like that. And let's check if we are the owner of this course. So const own course is going to be await db.course.find unique, where ID is params.course ID and user ID is user ID like that. If there is no own course, in that case, we can just return unauthorized the same way we did for the user ID like that. All right. And now we're finally ready to update our chapters. So for let item of list await db.chapter.update, where ID is item.id and data is going to be position item.position. So just like that. And then let's go ahead and let's just return new next response success with a status of 200 like this. So let's see if this is going to change anything. So I'm going to refresh here. I'm going to drag this one to the top and let's see if we're going to get message. It says chapters reordered and there we go. This one is at the top. If I refresh, it stayed at the top. So they have the correct position. So let me refresh this. So I don't have my Prisma Studio running. Let's go inside of my terminal and let's run npx Prisma Studio. Oops, npx Prisma Studio like that. And now we're going to see that our chapters all have different positions, right? So as you can see, this chapter 1, 2, 3, let me just zoom in. So this chapter 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 has position 0 in the database. But what happens if I go ahead and drag and drop this one all the way to the end? So let's wait for this to update. There we go, chapters reordered. And now if I refresh this, I think that this one should have, there we go, a position 3. So it works and all the other positions have switched as well. Now this one has the position 0. Perfect. So that is exactly what we wanted. One thing that I want to modify now is that when we drag and drop, it seems weird that we don't know what's happening, right? So let's add a little loading state that is going to help us with that. So let's go inside of the chapters form right here. And let's go all the way to the beginning of the return function. So in here, let's go inside of this div and let's write if is updating. We have that state. Let's go ahead and let's return a div with a loader2 from Lucid React. So make sure you have loader2 from Lucid React and you can remove the pencil. We're not going to need it. So loader2 is going to have a class name of animate-spin h-6 w-6 and text-sky-700 like that. And this div is going to have a class name of absolute like this, h-full w-full bg-slate-500/20 top-0 right-0 rounded-md flex items-center and justify-center. And let's also give this main parent div a relative class name like this. So we use this updating in the onReorder function. So if we did this correctly, when I drag and drop, there we go. You can see how now the entire form is blocked because we are doing the reordering. Perfect. So let's move this test to the top. There we go. It's reordering, it's loading. And if I refresh, it stays in the exact same position. Great. So we did an amazing job here. What we have to do now is enable this little pencil, right? So if I go ahead and find my onEdit function here inside this props, you can see that it's an empty array. Sorry, it's an empty function. So let's go ahead and let's create the onEdit function, which doesn't exist. So let's go just below our onReorder function. So right here, and it's going to be a very simple one. So const onEdit is going to take the ID, which is a string, and it's going to just do router.push backticks/teacher/courses/individual course ID/chapters /id like this, and we get the ID from this props right here. Perfect. So now if I click on the edit button, I should get a 404 page. There we go. So that's what we're gonna create next. We're gonna create the screen to actually add a description for our chapter and to upload a video for our chapter. Great job. So let's go ahead and let's create the chapter ID page, which is currently a 404 page. So I'm gonna go ahead inside of my app folder, inside of dashboard, routes, teacher, courses, course ID, and inside of here create a new folder called chapters, and inside create another folder in square brackets chapter ID like that. Then inside create a page.tsx element. And let's just quickly go and write chapter ID page like this with a div chapter ID. And there we go. I no longer have an error. So if I go back to my customized chapters, you can see that I can click on individual pencil button and I'm in the chapter ID and my URL is correct. Perfect. So it's going to be a very similar screen to our course ID page. So let's go ahead and let's mark this as an asynchronous function like this. And let's go ahead and let's extract the params. And let's give our params a type. So params are going to have a course ID, which is a string, and a chapter ID, which is a string as well, like that. Perfect. And now let's go ahead and let's get our user ID from out. And then we can check if there is no user ID, we can just return redirect like that from next/navigation to the root page. So just make sure you have those two imported. All right, and now we can load our chapter using the database util. So I'm going to import db from add/lib/db like that. And let's go ahead and let's write const chapter to be equal await db.chapter.findUnique like that, where ID is params.chapter_ID and course ID is params.course ID like that. And let's also include max data to be true if we have it. All right. So you should not get any errors here. If you are, make sure to confirm that in your schema, you have all the necessary fields in your chapter model. So you should have the max data like this. That's why I can include it. All right. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and let's just write if there is no chapter. In that case, we can return redirect to the root page again. All right. And now let's do a very similar thing like we did in the course ID page. So const required fields to publish this chapter is going to be chapter.title, chapter.description, and chapter.video URL like that. And then we're going to write const total fields to be required fields.length like that. Then we're going to have const completed fields, which are going to be required fields.filter boolean with a capital B dot length. So we're only going to get those fields which return true after they are run through this filter. Const completion text is going to be backticks, open parenthesis, completed fields / and then we're going to write total fields like that. There we go. And let's also just render that inside. So let's go ahead now that we have this. Let's give this a class name of padding 6 like that. And let's go ahead and write a div inside with the class name of flex items -center and justify -between like that. Let's go ahead and let's write a div here with a class name of w-full, and let's add a link component from next/link. So make sure you import link from next/link. I'm just going to move it to the top. All right. And let's go ahead and let's give this link an href backticks /teacher/courses /params.course ID. So basically back to where we came from, right? And let's give this link a class name of flex items dash center, text dash small, hover, opacity dash 75, transition, and margin bottom of 6. And let's just give it an arrow left icon from Lucid React.